A thread by Carlos Osuida. Another thread on mental illness from the perspective of a psychiatric patient. Me. It's not Donald Trump making people do this. It's the person herself, encouraged by leftism. Maybe Ames tweets this short video of a girl driving, absolutely acting like a mental patient over the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Leftists refuse to admit that mental illness is an undesirable disability. The reason I worked so hard to mitigate the effects of severe PTSD, anxiety, and depression was that I hated being unhappy. I accept that happiness is beyond me, but I've achieved peace of mind. Leftism encourages normalized mental illness in its adherents while claiming that political dissidents are mentally ill. In the US, this started in earnest in 1962 with the publication of Ken Kesey's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Americans began taking all their social cues from Hollywood. The narrative became those who we call mentally ill are actually the sanest among us, even though the same people attack political dissidents as mentally ill. Hollywood says that the Vietnam War was total insanity. Nope. The Vietnam War was nothing compared to World War I. There's not one sane thing about the Great War. In Vietnam, we suffered 47,434 battle deaths in 10 years. In World War I, we suffered 53,402 battle deaths in 6 months. The two sides dug trenches from Switzerland to the North Sea, sat in them for 4 years, and died by the millions. And that was just the Western Front. There was also the Eastern Front, the Italian Front, the Middle East, and East Africa. Nothing but futile killing. Modern weapons used by men with 19th century minds. At the start of American combat operations, we used 1914 tactics. Got slaughtered. We had the perfect Lewis light machine gun. Link in the description, live fire from episode 034, the Lewis gun. But we replaced it in France with the vastly inferior French Chauchat. It held only 20 rounds in magazines open to mud, and the parts from any two guns were not interchangeable, so our troops usually threw them away. The smallest fighting unit was the 59-man platoon, impossible to control, and we never trained assault specialists. The Germans trained every man in the army in assault tactics, and they created ad hoc shock troops of any size by simply putting together as many men as they needed. We had 2 tanks. The British Mark V was one. The male had 2 57mm guns and 3 machine guns. The female had 5 machine guns. Oh, here's your male. It was 130 degrees inside. The engine exhausted into the tank. It was so loud, the crew communicated in sign language, and the suspension was unsprung. Top speed, 4 miles per hour. The Germans had special anti-tank artillery, flat trajectory anti-tank mortars, 50 caliber anti-tank rifles, anti-tank bullets for infantry rifle and machine guns, and anti-tank grenades and explosives. In one of our attacks, we lost 24 of 34 tanks. The other tank was the French 2-man Renault FT. It attacked in squadrons of 4. 3 were armed with machine guns and 1 with a 37mm cannon. top speed 5 miles per hour. All the same German anti-tank weapons apply. The Germans came close to winning World War I. They lost for two reasons. One, on March 21st, 1918, they launched the America Battle, a massive, high-speed assault on the Western Front intended to knock the Allies out of the war before we entered in earnest. They cut through the French and British like butter, using massed firepower, air power, and speed. And that was their undoing. They outran their supply lines. So the French and British rallied, cut the supply lines, and pushed the Germans back. The second reason the Germans lost was that the morale of the soldiers and civilians had hit rock bottom. The Germans had created an absolute military dictatorship at home. They forced the people to eat sawdust and drink coffee made of acorns. Revolution broke out. The German Navy mutinied, and German soldiers began deserting. Only teenagers with no families were willing to fight. It was the revolution and the lack of morale that forced the Germans to sue for peace. And even then, the insanity didn't stop. The Treaty of Versailles was seen at the time as a guarantee of another war in 20 years. Will Dyson published this cartoon the day the treaty was signed. 1940 class saw all the unborn children who will fight and die in the next war. The tiger is Georges Clemenceau. And then we chopped up the Ottoman Empire without regard to the people of the Middle East, ensuring that they would take up arms at a future date. Hollywood wants you to think that the Vietnam War was the height of insanity, but that's all due to leftism. World War I made the British, French, and Americans refused to defend themselves, so when the inevitable Second World War started, we had our asses kicked for 2 years. Someday, I'll tell you about the unending harassment from the federal government and the state of California. They make Twitter look like nursery schoolers. Who cares about the harassment? Right, Donald Trump? I've got your back, always. Back to World War I. The German painter Otto Dix was a machine gunner in World War I. You tell me if you've ever seen anything like this coming out of the Vietnam War. Let's take a look. Okay. From the baby boomers on, all these leftist pansies think they've had it worse than everyone else. The reason men died so horribly in World War I is that they were innocent. They had no idea what was waiting for them. The British did, in fact, tunnel under the Germans and blow them up. Here's actual footage of one such operation, link in the thread. The craters still exist. You can visit them if you like. Another video of the World War I explosion that left a hole 70 feet deep. Underground warfare. Yes, Vietnam tunnel rats did a very tough job, but in World War I, miners had to worry about counterminers exploding out of the floor, ceiling, or walls with axes, daggers, pistols, and grenades. So, both sides listened with stethoscopes. If you detected a mine or a countermine, you used a camouflage. You drilled down to the enemy mine, dropped in dynamite, and detonated it, causing the mine to collapse. So tell me again how the Vietnam War was the height of insanity. No parachutes for pilots in World War I. That would encourage them to abandon the valuable aircraft. So Pilots jumped to their deaths or tried to ride the burning bastard down on the wing or tail. Zeppelins had no parachutes, too heavy, full of hydrogen. Here's where Heinrich Matthey landed in a British field after he jumped from his burning Zeppelin. This isn't a competition. Honor the fallen by acknowledging their suffering. Treat it with utmost solemnity. You didn't know that Sentinels have live rounds, did you? Now you do. I'll end with drill instructor Teresa King. She's been doing this for about a decade. You're in for a treat. Leftists, shut up. Insanity isn't romantic, it's a disability. Nobody is required to accommodate your acting out. Control yourselves or get controlled. Take it away, drill instructor King. Link in the thread. And remember,
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.